During these last weeks, it was impossible to avoid the horrific videos of the homicides of Renee Good and Alex Preddy at the hands of federal agents in Minneapolis. I did take some measure of comfort that the public conscience can still be shocked, even crossing political and tribal boundaries. That's because the multiple amateur videos insist on being seen. And the cliché, "A picture is worth 1,000 words," has been reborn for another generation. But also startling has been the collective response of Minnesotans, a coming together of many thousands of concerned citizens to reclaim the powerful historic principles rooted in our nation's foundational documents, a full-throated expression of democracy in action. If I was living there, I would join them, as one possible action arising out of what it means to be living in the meantime, given current conditions. Listeners to this podcast know that's my focus. Rather than simply regurgitating opinions on current events, I've wanted to help us examine who we are, what we believe, what the content of our lives actually reveals, and the fundamental matter of what it means to be part of the human community today, the demands of conscience along with a commitment to the common good. You might keep this in mind as you listen in on the conversation that follows. My producer, Brandon Batson, wanted to dig around this agenda, throw out some questions, and offer a bit of generational perspective. My hope, of course, is that this stimulates your own digging around the roots of conscience, awareness, and action. In any case, glad you're checking in. Take a listen to our conversation ahead.
Well, welcome to another episode of Living in the Meantime with Stephen Bauman. I am the producer of this podcast, Brandon Batson, and occasionally I like to just get Steve in a room and ask him questions about what's going on in the world and harass him. And so here we are again. And I think everybody out there, especially after this last post that you made about ragtime and sitting with some of the thoughts that you had after that, it gives us an opportunity to talk about kind of what's going on in the world and just some of your thoughts on that. And also, how do we live in the meantime of seeing kind of a lot of what's going on in this country right now, what's going on in our political sphere. And I know it's not necessarily the purpose of this podcast to address all of those concerns and to always have a perspective on it. But I think we agree that maybe we've kind of crossed the Rubicon on this particular moment on needing to say something and needing to talk about what does it look like to live in the meantime when things like what's going on in Minnesota are going on in our country.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, and as we've told our listeners, the point of this podcast in some ways is to keep a focus on living daily lives. What are we actually doing in the meantime as the chaos in our world is swirling around us? And I think it's so important to constantly return to the essence of what it means to be living a life that's committed to the deep perennial human and humane values for the benefit of the common good, and who we are in that mix and what we're actually doing. So we have to pay attention to what's going on in the world, no doubt about it. And we have to kind of find our way taking a stand, not unlike how I was speaking in the week of Martin Luther King, when I said that I had on my screen a couple of quotes of Martin King in the corner of my screen on a Post-it, just to keep me refreshed and they concerned our essential character and who we are in the moment, and standing firmly, securely, and clearly, seeing what is, and then situating ourselves. So that's an important thing, and that's part of what it means to be living in the meantime, is to take stock of what is going on. And a good example of that, I think, from a national point of view in the events of last Saturday, is the aftermath of everyone finally being exposed to the actual video footage so that they could see what was going on, what actually went down. And what they saw was horrific. And I think that that finally has kind of captured people's attention in a way that lots of other things have not. They've kind of been dissipating in the mist of distractions and algorithms and so on. But, we have to trust our own eyes from time to time. And partly that's also leads me back to say, well, part of the agenda is to continually anchor ourselves in the here and now, right where we are and what we are actually seeing and doing. Gosh, I think we can't hear this enough and be reminded of it enough. I have to remind myself of this on a daily basis. I have to say, Steve, for God's sakes, put this thing down and go out for a walk today and spend several hours in nature. Recollect your thoughts, re-anchor yourself, recenter yourself. And then also, go ahead.
Well, I was
What
just
were you?
gonna say, it's these moments, the idea that someone could be out there trying to help a woman who's being pushed down and end up in the situation that he ended up in. It of all of the things that we see in our feed, I think we're all captured by our algorithm, right? Like we're seeing people who agree with us. It's how it's built, and then for a singular moment to happen and it kind of pull everyone out of their algorithm for a second and say like, oh, wow, this is different. I don't see how I can justify this even if it's like how I feel like some people sit back and go like, well, it's just not as bad as it looks or as people make it out to be. And then you see something like that and it kind of pulls you out of that moment. It's like something has to be done. And I think that's where a lot of people are right now. It's like this heightened sense of anxiety, fear. They're seeing these things on their screen and everybody's being deeply affected by it. What do you think these events are kind of teaching us about where we are as people in this country? Like, what do you think it's saying about our values and how we're kind of at a tipping point?
Our values are confused. And, I'm also aware, excuse me, I'm also aware that we bring our own filters to the things that are coming at us as well. And one of the disciplines we have to struggle with is to try to be aware of the filters we bring. And so, for instance, this morning, I was listening to the press conference that Tom Homan now gave in Minneapolis. He's the border
Yeah.
czar that
Yeah.
kind of just came to Minneapolis to kind of see if he can't set things aright. And before I actually even listened, I thought to myself that I have to set aside filters so that I can actually hear what he says. Does that make sense? In other words,
No, it makes
I
perfect
try to
sense.
train myself to listen. Now, I'm not going to go anywhere particularly with that, with what he said per se, but I'm using it as an example of trying to train myself to be able to hear what's being said. And I think
Mm-hmm.
we don't know the outcome of we don't know what's going to happen just yet. Although there were lingering, I mean, not lingering, there were sort of tantalizing bits that came out that said there might be a de-escalation and so on and so forth. Anyway, setting the actual specifics aside of that for a moment, it's the discipline of also owning our own filters as we're listening to someone or reading something or taking in new information. We want that from the people who disagree with us. In fact, one of our problems with the people who disagree with us is we say, well, they don't see what is, right? They don't see it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so we have to own our own business in that process. Now, that said, I still wind up with a point of view about what went down in Minneapolis, and it was terrible. And it's a confusing conflation of American values right now. when our government stipulates right off the bat without a shred of evidence that, for instance, these are terrorists who are aggressively attacking the ICE agents, that makes us disbelieve what the government tells us. It shatters our level of trust and engagement. Can we believe what we're told from our government officials and so on, or can we not? When
I mean,
it's revealed.
that is just, I mean, I think that's the biggest turning point that I see, even for myself, is in people have been talking about this with AI and with just like what's happening on social media and stuff, that like eventually we won't be able to trust our eyes, because it's videos that have been altered, videos that are being changed. We and I've been like, I don't know that that'll ever be a thing, but I'm seeing now it's like there's such distrust out there, even in myself, where I'm like, I don't know that I can even trust what I'm seeing. And I think that's just such a new uh, threshold that we've crossed. And I think we all are getting our information from different places. And so it's really disorienting. And I was talking, I'll be a little transparent, but I was talking with my therapist this week about just like, I feel helpless. I feel like I don't know what to do. I want to help in some way, but I don't know what the practical ways are to help. We're trying to think of as a church community, what to do, how to step out, how to stand with our neighbors. And it's really hard to figure out those things right now. And I was saying one statement that I made that, I mean, it didn't make her laugh, but she kind of chuckled a little bit, was I was like, I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. And she chuckled because she's a 70-something-year-old woman. And she started naming off times in her life when she saw similar things, like Democratic Convention in the 60s, Kent State, like all of these times where people were extremely discontent, extremely distrustful of the government, like all these things. And I was like, okay, well, it made me feel better in a second, because I was just like, okay, maybe this isn't wholly new, and maybe we actually can come out of this. And maybe we can come back together. Maybe we can move forward. Maybe we can stand with our neighbors. I don't know. Like I was just, that was something that I wanted to ask you about, is do you remember any other time in your life, in your wisdom walk, where you've seen this kind of thing and
Well,
seen the effects of it? Does it remind you of anything?
well, I'll share a short story from when I was probably in college. And I was having a conversation with my father, and this was when all of the brouhaha around Nixon kind of erupted. And we were having a conversation, and he, of course, I mean, I wasn't aggressive in my point of view particularly, although I was clear what I was thinking, which led him to say to me, Steve, do you honestly believe the president of the United States would lie to us? And I was stunned, but it was a real window into my father, number one, and a level of, and he's a smart guy. I mean, he was a successful, smart man, but the level of naivete in that comment to me was breathtaking, breathtaking. But it also framed a context. I think he was speaking for a whole lot of people just like himself at the
Oh,
time, so that, and again, it goes back to the notion of it's so important that we see what is, and we examine our own filters. So he had the filter that coming out of World War II, that America could do no wrong, and the leadership of America could do no wrong. And that in part fueled the great discontent that we experienced going through the Vietnam era. And I went through, which current generations have not had to go through, but the whole draft situation. My oldest
mm.
brother, who was 6 years older than me, in those, the things changed a little bit around the draft as time moved forward in those years. But he, as he was approaching graduation from college, knew that he was fodder for the draft. So he was proactive in enlisting into Army intelligence, wanting to escape the infantry assignment, and he was assigned to Army intelligence in Vietnam, and so his first assignment was Vietnamese language school. And
Wow.
I remember him when he was investigating the American black market in drugs in Vietnam. That was his assignment when he was on duty in
Wow.
Vietnam. And he told me that when he uh, got off the plane after his tour of duty had come to an end, and he got off the plane in San Francisco, he took the medals of anything that was an honorific for his service in Vietnam. He took them and threw them in the trash in the airport. He was so absolutely thunderstruck with the whole bullshit nature of the whole shebang. He was completely
Wow.
demoralized. And I ended up going through the first or second lottery. And that was like a lottery for your life. You were either going to, if your number came up, well, who knows what would have happened. Turned out my number was 348, which was a real safe number.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I wasn't picked, but I say that still feeling funny about it in a way, because if my number had been 20, I would have had a very different life,
Right. Right. Oh, yeah.
unless I would have decided to head out to Canada, or as some people were trying to do.
Some people have.
So,
I
go ahead.
Well, I was just going back to that, like the generational trust, and we've talked about this even in some of our other podcasts in a roundabout way. I would say that like my grandfather's generation kind of trusted government institutions, I would even say, at a certain level.
Oh,
And then I
yes.
think you're in my dad's same kind of general age vicinity. You
Yeah.
trust in a little different way, but ultimately trust institutions to do what they say they're going to do. I say millennials, where I sit, trust it a little less, and I would say that Gen Z trusts it even less. And I wonder, like, that erosion of belief in institutions, government, even church, even civil,
Well, here's the thing.
things, like, what is that?
We can't get things done over time without institutional structures. It's an
Right,
impossibility. You can't cure
right.
cancer with a GoFundMe campaign. As happy as that might make you feel that I've given my $10 to GoFundMe cancer, you can't cure it over, that requires the interlocking commitment of numerous sorts of institutional entities over time. And so we can't live without them successfully, which suggests to me that in the meantime, as institutions are going through a crisis of identity and trustworthiness, they need to be rebuilt from the ground up and reprioritizing ideas of trust, consistency, and fidelity. I did a recent piece on fidelity in my podcast, a faithful commitment to hanging on to the truth and to stay true to our commitments and our loyalties, if you will, going forward. So we can burn the place down, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to build something up again. So burning it down is not a strategy. It's not a strategy ultimately. That's the
Well,
problem.
I've always heard that any old donkey can tear down a barn. It takes a real
Exactly.
special one to build one.
Exactly.
And I think, what's so interesting to me about this and the distrust and I think certain institutions have given us reason to distrust them. And I think we're
Of
going through
course.
one of those, of course, right now we're going through that with our government and with the current administration for sure. But I will also say that apathy and disengagement will dramatically impact us in a negative way. And I
Agreed.
feel my generation and maybe even younger generation in some ways choosing apathy and disengagement. And I would say the exact opposite is what we need to do. We need to engage. We need to be aware. We need to learn how to fight back in our communities through things that work, legislation, voting, like all of these things, and still believe that we can. Like, I think part of the game plan is to convince us that there's no way that we can turn the tide, that we are disempowered, and that our vote doesn't count, and that our, working together in community doesn't work, that organizing doesn't work. And that's just not true. And I think there's a concerted effort to convince us that that is the truth.
Well, there needs to be a rediscovery of one's essential agency and power. And you're right, apathy and cynicism will only make things worse. And if the younger generations are kind of awash in apathy, disengagement, and distraction, because I think distraction is another big capital D here that has to be named and claimed as in a unique way today that didn't exist 20 years ago when I was, coming up through my own processes of youthful advance into the future. I wasn't my generation didn't have the distraction of the internet and all of that. And I was reading a review recently. Well, it was an article in my local paper that was interviewing students about how there's a policy in high school now, or in all schools, where you can't have your phone. And they were interviewing the students on this point. And all of the people they interviewed said it was a relief. It was a relief. And I that makes sense to me. Although I think adults are kind of surprised by that. But on the other hand, it makes perfect sense that they are relieved that they don't have to just live there in that universe. Some of them even named their social lives improved dramatically. It was sort of intriguing to me. Anyway, I'm using that simply as an example of the other big capital D or distraction from our current culture. And we have to be intentional about divesting ourselves of that addiction.
Yeah. And I think social media, AI, information sharing, all of this has become kind of a theme in our podcast, whether we wanted it to or not, whether it was because we brought Mark on or just it's been what's on your mind in the shorter ones or whatever. But, I think that's one place where there is this expectation on people who are public of any kind. That could be pastor, that could be the head of a nonprofit, that could be somebody in government, whatever, to be displaying your thoughts and feelings and opinions on all of these things through the lens of social media or through just through your social engagement online. And I think it leads to thinking that that's enough, that if I just say that I'm, in favor of this or not in favor of this, like I've said enough, I've done enough. But I think it also keeps us from having these conversations in person with people with whom we may disagree, and having these conversations in church spaces and different things like that, where we actually could interface with another human being who may see things slightly differently than us. And I think that just continues this divide of, you know what I'm saying? Does that make any sense?
Well, yes. I mean, you're talking about the creation of tribes and tribalism in our culture as well, that social media and all of the algorithms actually feeds on. It feeds on that. And, tribalism gets our juices going and excites us and so on. And I understand it, but boy, we have to be so on guard about it. And we have to continually, intentionally put ourselves in spaces where there are people. And we have to be thinking proactively about how can I participate in my community, in my local community. And I believe a lot of the antidote to this, as I say in the ragtime piece that's just put out, is in small, intentional decisions to engage other people proactively in values of kindness, authenticity, truth, and in a politics for the sake of the common good. If we invest ourselves in these things and are intentional about it, we will begin to make an inroad in advancing our cultural moment. Let's put it that way. And I actually think there could be a contagion around. I think that can become a contagion. This past week, Brandon, I hosted what I called a salon in my home. This has been on my mind for several years, to bring together a collection of people to talk about something that matters. Because what has dawned on me as our institutional lives, traditional institutional lives have been disintegrating culturally, like churches, synagogues, mosques, and so on, Rotary, as these have been dissipating out of our cultural context, as the bowling alone syndrome has been amplified in our current days. It is so clear to me that adult people don't have an opportunity to be together in environments where they're talking about stuff that actually matters and important to their lives and to their sharing. And so I invited one of my former guests, Mark Hurst, up to lead a conversation on tech and AI to a group of, I don't know, somewhere between 15 and 20 people in my living room. It was a collection of millennials and a few of my older friends, and it mixed it up a little bit with my daughter and son-in-law and so on. And number one, no one said they didn't want to come. Everyone showed up. Everyone was really glad to be here. We had an extremely excellent conversation that was open, warm, engaged, and deeply sharing. And every person at the end of it said, because I advertise it as a proof of concept event. Will this work? Does this have meaning? Everyone thought this was fabulous. Let's do it again. And I consider that just simply a small act of doing something for the sake of advancing making an inroad in our cultural moment, bringing people together to talk about stuff that actually matters. And I actually asked this at the end. How often are you with people where you have a conversation about substantial topics, deeply and engaged? And they all said, hardly ever, hardly ever.
And I think that it probably in that room, you probably have some common agreement about a lot of things, but you probably have a lot of dissonance as well. And
Sure.
To be able to sit in that kind of environment where you're able to express yourself and hear from someone else who you may not agree with.
So we had an interesting conversation about that in the midst of all of this. It was good.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
very good. It was a very good conversation. Anyway, I was using that as an example of kind of what's a little thing one could do to bring a group of people together in your home to have conversations of substance. The church used to provide that kind of just naturally, but as church and synagogue and mosque participation has been diminishing at a rapid clip through these last years, that opportunity has been dissipating. We have to find other ways to be deeply engaged with these matters that are most profound and that are binding to us as in building community. We just have to find intentional ways of doing this. And, we're speaking of the institutional problems, the Christian church has had its share, hasn't it? In a variety of contexts, in a variety of ways. And now when people hear the word Christian, a secular person who hears the word Christian might think instantly of, Christian nationalists, as though they speak for all of us who claim some allegiance to following the way of Christ, which couldn't be further from the truth, of course. But so we all have a responsibility about living. Well, we all have responsibilities about being a participant within our common life.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this, that there are two emotions that I kind of see myself falling into and then mirrored back to me all the time, online, not online, in person, and that's fear and anger. And And I think that in these times we're overcome, and sometimes it can create stagnation. Sometimes it can create, inaction. And I'm wondering like how you see we should be maybe channeling that fear and that anger into something positive. Like, is there a way to channel that? Like, I feel like anger for anger's sake doesn't accomplish anything. So like trying to live in the meantime with those emotions, like how can we funnel that? How can we do something that can honor this situation in the meantime?
Well, there's a line in the first letter of John in our Bible that one day just kind of slapped me across the face, which was perfect love casts out all fear. And a light bulb went off for me that the opposite of love isn't hate. In a way, love and hate are kind of like kissing cousins. They're sort of like faith and doubt, you know? The opposite of love, it dawned on me, is fear. You can't love if you're in a space of fear. This is why I never could sign up for the old Christian doctrines that were trying to scare us into heaven. You know, as though God were saying, "Love me, or else I'm gonna burn you forever and ever." That never made any sense to me. And of course, it's because you can't coerce someone into loving you. You can
Mm,
only it comes as a gift. You don't scare somebody into loving you, and this has ramifications for how we parent, but it also has ramifications for how we behave within the common life of the communities in which we're a part. You don't scare someone into positive good ends. You might need to bracket somebody. You might need to boundary someone when they're doing hateful things. I don't disagree with that at all. But as a matter of course, love, broadly defined in a non-sentimental way, is the only real antidote to fear. So
yeah.
for those of us who can hear this sort of thing in the space, if we are afraid, I would, you know, one one methodology is to work the concept of love in a deep and meaningful manner in your life, and to have that conversation with people you trust. Love and trust also go together. Truth also goes together with love and trust, as does faith. Even as that famous other passage says, faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love.
Mm.
You know, I know that
And I
gets a little airy, a little, but actually loving someone has to do with what we do. How does it show up in our lives? It isn't a warm, toasty feeling. I mean, I can say, I love you, Brandon, which is nice, but the way I express, the way that takes on meaning is by what I do with you and for you and on behalf of you. And that doesn't mean I have
right.
to like everything you are or do. In fact, it might mean saying something truthful that I see and engaging it with you, you know? So just like we do with the people in our lives, our spouses, our significant others, our children, and so on.
No, and I just think about that when I'm looking at some of the great work that's going on in Minneapolis and around the country in some of these places, and how religious leaders and how community organizers and people are stepping up and creating, networks to be able to like help immigrant families, to be able to kind of direct them in how to get the services they need and how to get them food because they're afraid to go outside. Like, I think like for those of us who are in places where ICE is and where these kinds of things are happening, like getting involved in that way, I think is the best way to show love and to also not be like just so downtrodden by everything that you completely just, isolate, stop thinking about anyone other than yourself. Like I find myself like that sometimes where I'm bombarded by the news and by my phone. And so I'm like, well, there's nothing I could possibly do. No, there are many ways that I could get involved and create a positive impact.
Yeah, I think people get confused that unless I can do a big gesture, it's not worth doing. And we all
Right.
have to get used to the idea that it's the exact opposite. It's my daily life, my daily living in the meantime. What am I doing today in a way that is upbuilding for the common good? How am I structuring my life, my time? What values am I promoting? If I'm feeling angry and fearful, how am I using that as an engine to foster positive outcomes, as opposed to angry outbursts, say, or believing that if I'm online spouting my mouth off in my opinion, that I've done my duty, and that's not where it's at. You're right; it has to show up in how we're living. And how I'm living, one of my favorite quotes of all time, and I I'm not certain who to attribute it to, but it's
Yeah. Yeah.
what you do screams so loud I can't hear what you say. That's such a an important message, and I've told parents this all the time. Your kids will learn infinitely more by who you are as a person, what you do with your lives and how you behave, than they will by what you say. What you say, you know, is
Yeah.
is just the very surface of the ocean. What they take on is everything that you are and are with them and do with them.
Right. And I think you've basically answered what was my last question, which was, as people of faith or even just of conscience, which,
Yeah,
we've got a
yeah,
large group of people here, like, how do you bring about the shift that we need to see in our world, in our country? And I think that's it. It's like, it takes action
yes.
and acting upon our values and what we say we believe about the world and people and humanity, and seeing the goodness in people, and acting. And I think that speaks to me for sure.
Yeah, and, as we were saying early on in this conversation, to to maintain a discipline of seeing what is, and, what is in fact real. I can't tell you, Brandon, how many times in working with people over the years, and when they're trying to work out problems in their own lives, I can't tell you how many times their fundamental issue is they don't see what is. They can't see themselves. They just can't see it. If they had a sincere intention about, quote, getting better, and they enter therapy, they will enter therapy with the idea of, I want to see what is real, what's in fact true, what's real about my life, how I'm situated in my own skin. It's an excruciating discipline. And as a result, a lot of people will just sort of play around the edges of that. They'll even go to therapy and play at it, not with the intention of actually wanting to see what is in fact real.
Mm.
We're all in that boat. We all have our tendency to want to avoid what's right staring us in the face. But that's also true with us in more macro environments, in our wider communal environments, in our political environments, in our cultural environments as well. So that discipline remains really important.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thanks so much for being with me on the podcast
Yeah.
today. And if you are joining us today, please, like and subscribe. Go to stephenbauman.com for all of our links, where you can follow, where you can join us on Substack, and we'll see you next time.
Great. Thanks, Brandon.